Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Books and More Talk podcast with me, your host, Rizia, where we talk about the books that build us. So I've been doing this for almost 2 years now. I think like September will be 2 years. And the number of episodes that I've been doing has been dwindling. I'm very aware of that. Honestly, I think the reason is that writing these reviews have become a bit intense for me because it takes me quite long to write the review. So for this particular one, we're going to be talking about The Raven Scholar by Antonia Hodgson. So what I've done is I've written the review and then asked AI to refine it for me, to kind of like consolidate ideas that I had and to put it into a good flow and to perhaps improve the language a little bit as well, while trying to keep my own voice as much as possible. So that's why, obviously like to feed it something and then ask it to give me something back rather than asking it to write the whole thing from scratch. So I'm hoping that this is going to make the process a little bit easier for me. On my next book, actually, what I've decided to do is to take voice notes while I'm reading and then feed my voice notes with the ideas and concepts into AI and kind of see what it comes up with and if I agree with it or not. So I'm just trying to find ways to make it easier for me so that I can actually maybe, publish more episodes like more frequently, and also to keep this going because I really enjoy talking about the books. But sometimes with life, it becomes a little bit difficult to try and find the time to sit down and write these things. So hoping to find some tools that will make it a little bit easier for me. So this one is, like I said, The Raven Scholar by Antonia Hodgson. It was recommended to me at Exclusive Books, and I'd actually like to say thank you to them for giving me the book to read. And you can find this book at any Exclusive Books. And The Raven Scholar, it was an exhilarating blend, really, of academia, political intrigue, deadly tournaments, ancient magic, and murder. It felt like stepping into a kingdom that was stitched together from myth philosophy and then blood-soaked ambition. And every time I thought I understood where the story was heading, this book like pulled the floorboards out from under me. Like there were twists here, and I did not see them coming. I don't know if anyone has read this, but if you saw the twists coming, then oh my word, like you're quite the detective because it took me completely by surprise. The premise itself is fantastic. After 24 years on the throne, Emperor Burson the Brusque of Orrun has to step down, right? That's the law. So 7 contenders from the rival monasteries of Orrun, they gathered to compete for the crown, right? Each of them representing one of the sacred animals. So you have the fox, the raven, the tiger, the ox, the bear, the monkey, and the hound. The dragons do not compete because they say that they don't want the throne, they're too good for that. But they send a proxy known as a visitor. So before the tournament can begin, though, one of the contenders is murdered. Her name is Gaida Rak, and the investigation falls to Neema Kraa, who is an eccentric raven scholar who never wanted any part in politics or power. She just wants to study, you know. So that's like a characteristic of the ravens, is that they're very scholarly. Knowledge. The foxes are the cunning ones, the tigers with honor and pride, the oxen for labor and endurance, the monkeys value creativity, and the dragons, well, who knows what the dragons value. And together they form the 8 guardian beings, right? And this book is narrated by the raven. And the raven and all of these animals, they're not a single animal, but the collective consciousness of everyone that ever was and ever will be. So like the raven is not just a single raven, but it's every raven that ever was and every raven that ever will be. And this gives the story like a mythic quality, like the entire empire is being watched by something ancient and clever. And not everyone believes in these guardians in the literal sense. Like some of them believe that these animal guardians truly exist, but people like Neema, for example, see them as metaphors. So the emotional heart of the story begins with Yana and Ruko Valit, the children of disgraced rebel Orrun Valit. So at the beginning, Yana is accused of treason as a child, right? She's 16 years old, and her brother Ruko, her twin brother Ruko, condemns her to exile to secure his own place within the tiger monastery. And it's such a brutal scene. So you can read the book and find out why it is that Ruko is the one who condemns her and not the emperor. And it's such a brutal scene though, because Ruko is not evil. He's ambitious, he's insecure, he's desperate for approval, which he never got from his father, and he's still young enough to believe that the success that he will gain from this justifies his cruelty somehow. And this single decision is like kind of the starting off point for the entire book. And this particular decision haunts the novel all the time. We always come back to this point. So Neema she's a very interesting character. She's brilliant. She's awkward. She's very practical, but she's also really lonely. She has no friends. So early in the story, she's the one who writes Yana's order of exile, right? And she says that she did it because it's her duty as a scholar. And she says that even if she refused to do it, because it was wrong, right? You don't condemn a 16-year-old to death, to exile, which ultimately is going to lead to death. Because they had sentiment for their father, essentially was what it was, right? So, but Neema says that if she refused, then someone else would have done it anyway. And then this brought up this question for me, right? Is fulfilling your duty enough when that duty violates your conscience? That's something interesting to think about, isn't it? Even more so because Neema ultimately benefits from that decision, and she rises through the ranks of the empire because of it, which makes the moral tension there even sharper, right? So Neema is also very unusual for a fantasy protagonist. Like if you read fantasy books in a kind of regularity and you kind of think of your typical protagonist, she's not charismatic, nor is she physically imposing. In that way, she actually kind of reminds me of Vin from the Final Empire. And people generally dislike her. She's not well liked. She has no friends. Her closest companion is actually a chameleon called Pink Pink. And Pink Pink is really cute, but Pink Pink is also like very unsettling by the time the story ends. So then comes the tournament itself, right? The structure of this competition is actually like one of my favorite things about the book. Each monastery designs challenges that reflect its values. And then the contenders also face one another in one-on-one combat. So remember, Neema is not a warrior, right? And like, she's very concerned that she would actually die at every one of these. But at the same time, as this competition is going on, Neema is trying to solve Gaida's murder because she's scared that she's going to be blamed for it, because it's pretty well known that the two of them didn't like each other, right? I won't tell you why. You can read the book and find out. But the pacing here is excellent because the book like constantly shifts between the murder mystery, the political maneuvering, the magical lore, and then outright survival. So the magical elements become like increasingly strange and compelling, like through Neema's mysterious book that she has, the Tales of the Raven. So this is a book even that she came to acquire under very strange circumstances. And the book seems to be alive, like turning its own pages and revealing stories exactly when it feels Neema needs to hear them. So through this book, she learns about a cursed tiger blade that's capable of summoning the eight back into the world. And the implications are terrifying because the prophecy says that the next time the eight return, they will not come to save the world. They will destroy it. So the murder mystery itself, again, is genuinely, it's clever. I liked that the apparent like supernaturality of the murder eventually had a more grounded explanation anyway. So Gaida was poisoned before she was killed with the tiger blade. And the thing is that the tiger blade, when it sheds blood again, is when the eight will return. So obviously finding this tiger blade in Gaida was terrifying because they thought that this was now going to result in the summoning of the eight. But it didn't, which meant that it wasn't the tiger blade that killed her, right? So Neema figures this out, like, good for her because she's really smart. But every answer that Neema seems to find regarding Gaida's death only like exposes another larger conspiracy, right? And then comes the twist. So she finds out that the emperor is not actually who they think he is. The emperor is actually rebel Antonia Valit, who has been using this forbidden chameleon spell from the dragons. And wow, that floored me. I did not see that coming. So like Neema and Gaeta suspected that there was something wrong with person's identity, right? But they thought that it was his brother who had taken over his identity, and it was. But there was an additional step to it that Andrin had then taken over his brother's identity. So there was like 3 levels to this emperor's identity at this point. But I didn't see it coming. I did not think that it was Andrin Valit. Is that actually through the entire book, I thought that Yana was perhaps alive and that she would come back at some point in some form, but she didn't. It was her father. And the spell that he uses is really horrifying, right? To become another person, he actually steals a piece of the other person's soul. But the downside of it is that he slowly loses himself. And it's like, it's parasitic immortality, right? And it says that to every spell casts a shadow, and to be another man, he must lose himself. And what makes this twist actually work so well, right, is that it recontextualizes everything. So Ruko goes from a villain and his life becomes tragic, right? His father manipulated him from the shadows. He favored his sister Yana and he discarded him completely emotionally, and he ultimately intended to steal his body and his identity anyway because he wanted Ruko to win the tournament, which he did. And Ruko spends like this whole novel trying to become worthy of approval, but it was never really available to him. And so Ruko is actually the next rightful emperor because he wins the tournament, and his father then takes on his identity. And he starts stealing bits of his son's soul to keep himself going as emperor. And like you could see that he could potentially do this like for a very long time, right? So because of this though, I actually grew very fond of Ruko because underneath all that armor and pride, he's still a kid, right? And this guilt has really hollowed him out. And one of my favorite scenes actually in the book is it's very small, right, compared to the world-ending stakes like that surrounds it. So during Ruko's fight with the dragon visitor, whom his mother summoned to kill him, by the way, Benna cheers him on. So Benna is she was Neema's assistant, and she's a bear. Like, she's not an actual bear, but she's from the bear monastery, right? So Benna cheers Ruko on from the crowd because Ruko helped her escape imprisonment. And he didn't have to do it, but he did it. And it's these little things that he does that makes you realize that he still has a heart. So Benna, because this fight is not going well, right? And Benna cheers him on and she's like, Team Ruko. And that like tiny moment of like faith and kindness gives him the strength to keep fighting, and he wins. And in a book like filled with betrayal and manipulation and everyone kind of stepping over the other to get to the top, like these little bits of humanity, they matter, you know, and I feel like it reflects the world that we live in as well. So another character that I really liked is Cain Bellari, right? So Cain is a fox. He is charming, he's sly, and he's surprisingly compassionate though. And he initially, you feel like he's initially there for comic relief, right? Before the story reveals something much darker about him, he is possessed by the fox guardian itself. And I also liked Sol. Sol is the solitary raven. So each guardian has fragments, right? Because they consist of all of the creatures that ever were and will be. So one of the fragments of the raven is the solitary raven. And he becomes Neema's companion. And it seems so fitting because Neema is also kind of a solitary raven. So they're solitary together now. So he becomes Neema's companion like later on in the story. So Sol actually brings like a little bit of gentleness and melancholy. And he also draws out a bit of a softer side of Neema eventually, right? Which makes their scenes together like quite memorable. And the mythology surrounding the hidden realm and the guardians becomes like very unsettling though as the novel progresses, because you obviously find out more and more about it. So the fox crossed over into the human world like a long time ago, and it survives by moving from host to host, becoming like half immortal spirit and half human parasite. So the thing is that the fox is the only one who moved its entire self, like all of its fragments into the real world, whereas the others only moved fragments of themselves from the hidden realm because they weren't allowed. The fox was never allowed to cross over because the dragon didn't trust it. And then it found a way to cross over, but it crossed over with its entire being. And as a result, it wasn't actually able to go back to the hidden realm. The only way it could go back was by possessing someone. And once that person fell asleep, then the tiger could go back to the realm. So by the final act, the book becomes like wonderfully chaotic, right? So ancient guardians are summoned finally, souls are stolen, alliances are collapsing, and reality itself starts like tearing at the seams, right? The scene where the eight finally return is fantastic. They arrive as a storm of claws, feathers, teeth, and fury before being trapped within the palace walls by Ruko Valit. And the ending leaves the world in a very unsettling place, right? Ruko is trapped in a cell while his father wears his face and sits on the throne. And the thing is that Neema had a vision. The ravens showed her a vision that if Ruko Valit wins the tournament, it will result in the eight returning and destroying the world. So even though it was Ruko's face that she saw, it wasn't Ruko himself, right? It was his father. And wow, yeah. So anyway, the guardians are imprisoned now. Orrun is ruled by a monster, and Neema and Cain flee. And perhaps, I think, most chillingly of all, even though the guardians are imprisoned, the fox escapes. So the final scene, you have Vabras, who is Emperor Berson's like head of security kind of guy. And the most distinguishing feature about Vabras is that he has no distinguishing features. And the final scene involving him and the fox was just brilliant, right? It swings from this dark comedy to horror within moments. And this image of the fox grinning through Vabras's face while humming to itself. It's like one of the funniest but creepiest moments in the entire book, right? But I did feel slightly ambushed by the ending, right? Because I didn't realize that this was the start of a larger series. I should have known fantasy anyway. But after investing like so much time into a huge story, and it's a long book, right? I was not emotionally prepared for the narrative to stop when it did. And apparently the sequel, The Fox in Winter, is only due to be published in October 2027, which feels like 9 centuries away. So, but one thing that I'm still undecided about here is Neema herself. So intellectually, she's a fascinating character. But emotionally, I found myself like more attached to characters like Cain, Ruko, and Benna. Even Saul. Cain in particular, like he brought warmth to every scene that he entered, and whenever he disappeared from the page, like I felt his absence, right? Ruko had like layers upon layers beneath his armor, guilt, loneliness, ambition, vulnerability, and this desire to be worthy of love and approval, right? Even Benna, like with her kindness and her loyalty, like she left a strong emotional impression as well. And Neema, though, by contrast, like she feels intentionally distant. And I think maybe that's the point, because as a scholar, she has trained herself to observe rather than to feel, so that you can separate your emotion from your judgment, right? But that objectivity makes her an effective investigator and maybe strategist, but it comes at a cost, right? So she survives by keeping herself at arm's length from others, and maybe a bit from herself as well. I know that this probably also comes from her interactions with others, particularly those of the nobility, but she is an emotionally distant person. And while she does through the book grow more capable and willing to act, I'm not sure that she undergoes the same emotional transformation that characters like Ruko do, you know? But I think that maybe the sequels might soften some of those edges of hers. And even when she escapes with Cain at the end, she finds herself questioning whether or not her journey is going to continue with or without him. And I found that a bit strange, because they kind of like just found each other again, and she was really happy with him, and they were kind of like each other's safe spaces. And I just was like, why are you thinking of, leaving him behind? I don't know. But maybe the sequels will help us to see more warmth beneath her reserve. So still, The Raven Scholar was an excellent fantasy novel. It's intelligent, it's layered, it's emotionally complicated, and it's jam-packed with memorable characters and ideas. It combines murder mystery or political fantasy, mythology, and existential horror into something that feels like fresh and distinct, which is great because I think, a lot of books feel like a lot of other books nowadays. Which is fine, there are formulas that work, but this one is different, which is really great. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars, and it is a feathered labyrinth of ambition, grief, prophecy, and terrible choices. So this is me, your host, Rizia, on the Books and Mortar podcast, where we talk about the books that build us. Until next time, bye.